Good day, everyone. I'm Janalyn Songa, your today's presenter for this chapter. And for this chapter, we'll be talking about the history and theory of critical literacy. Before we proceed, we're going to know first what is critical literacy. When we say critical literacy, it is the ability to read text in an active, reflective manner in order to better understand power, inequality, and injustice in human relationships. Pag sinabing critical literacy ay ang pamamaraan kung saan makikita at magkakaroon ng ugnayan sa mundo. It is having as regular one's life, the skills and the desires to evaluate the society and the world. It is how we see and interact the world around us. The purpose of critical literacy in text is defined as a vehicle through which individuals communicate with one another using the codes and conventions of society. And this includes the songs, novels, conversations, pictures, and movies. History and theory of critical literacy. The term critical literacy was developed by social critical theorists concerned with dismantling social injustice and inequalities. These critical theories contend that unequal power relationships are prevalent, and those in power are the ones who generally choose what truths are to be privileged. For instance, through institutions like schooling and government, these ideologies are supported, thereby perpetuating the status quo. Within schools, only particular knowledge is legitimized, thus excluding groups who are unable to contribute to the process of authentication of that knowledge. According to Anne Beck, critical educational theory or critical pedagogy applies the tenets of critical social theory to the educational arena and takes on the task of examining how schools reproduce inequality and justice. Critical social theories are concerned with oppressive and unjust relationships produced by traditional forms of schooling and critique the traditional models of education, which typically place the teacher at the front of the classroom, possessing and transmitting the knowledge of students who sit idly learning or receiving the information. And this is Paulo Freire. In the Pedagogy of Oppressed by Paulo Freire provides an example of how critical literacy is developed in an educational context. Freire proposes a system in which students become more socially aware through critique of multiple forms of injustice. This awareness cannot be achieved if students are not given the opportunity to explore and construct knowledge. Freire describes the traditional type of education as the banking concept of education. This model of education is characterized by instruction that turns students into containers, into receptacles to be filled by teacher. In these classrooms, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those whom they consider to know nothing, and the teachers separate themselves as being the possessors of knowledge. And as the opposite of the bunking model, teachers who could recognize the possible value of developing critical literacy do not view their students as vessels to be filled, and instead create experiences that offer students opportunities to actively construct knowledge. In this model, schools become spaces where students interrogate social conditions through dialogue about issues significant to their lives. Teachers engaged in critical literacy serve less as instructors and more as facilitators of conversations that question traditional power relations. Critical literacy is for us future educators as well na masanay o sanayin ang mga students natin bigyan ng mas malalim hulukayin yung context na binabasa nila para mas maintindihan kung merong underlying issues na present sa context na yon, thus excluding groups who are unable to contribute to the process of the authentication of the knowledge. Critical literacy is important because it is all about thinking deeply of the student. Knowledge emerged only through invention and reinvention. Through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. Using critical pedagogical methods, teacher creates spaces where they can be learners and students can be teachers, thus providing a context for everyone to construct and interrogate theories of knowledge. Critical literacy in practice. Critical literacy in practice. The development of this critical literacy encourages students to question issues of power, implicity, disparities within social contexts like socioeconomic status, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and many more. Becoming critically literate means that students have mastered the ability to read and critique messages in text in order to better understand whose knowledge is being privileged. In critical literacy in practice, nakafocus sa issue ng kapangyarihan. Something to do with power relations, sino ang may hawak ng kapangyarihan at sino ang hindi nabibigyan or denied nitong mga kapangyarihan, and who's abused by the power, and for those who don't receive privilege to make decisions for themselves. Ito ay may kinalaman sa mga issue na talaga namang sumasalamin sa kasalukuyang estado na sa ating lipunan. May kinalaman sa race o lahi, in cultures, may kinalaman sa social class or social status, in gender, may kinalaman din sa media at kapaligiran. The reason why we should teach critical literacy is we want our students to develop ability to understand messages that they consume, maybe in our classroom or other source in media sa pamamagitan ng pagsusuri or analyze in the context or information that they consume on what they read and kung paano maipapakita. Siyempre, we want our student will be able to identify discrimination within institution in our society. So sila mismo sa edad nila, matukoy nila anong pwersa sa lipunan na nagpapakita ng mga pang-aabuso, denial of rights at iba pa. For Michelle Nobel and Colin Lancashire suggest that when students become critically literate, they can examine ongoing development, the parts they play in the world, and how they make sense of experiences. Facilitating the development of critical literacy promotes the examination and reform of social situations and exposes students to the biases and hidden agendas within text. Thus, in order to become critically literate, one must learn to read in reflective manner. Read in this connotation means to give meaning to messages of all kinds instead of just looking at the words on page and comprehending the meaning of those words. And according to Adrian Blackledge, to be a tool for people to analyze the division of power and resources in their society and transform discriminatory structures. And now we're going to critical literacy in the classroom. In critical literacy in the classroom, within the frame of this literacy, it is important to look at texts like novels, magazine, articles, short stories, films, and many more. Through a lens that challenges societal norms, students can evaluate whose knowledge is being privileged in text and deconstruct the message of those meanings. As readers, students also evaluate the social construction of text and question the factors that may have influenced the author to create the text in a specific manner. Moreover, using critical literacy, teachers encourage students to look at texts from the perspectives and recreate them from the standpoint and marginalized groups in order to analyze the power relations and social inequities promoted by text. So in this literacy, the teacher gave the student the opportunity to read, to evaluate and reflect, and to embark upon the creative process of creating, of formulating solutions or reconstructions of the text. Nabanggit nga natin dito na ito ay may kinalaman sa inequality and injustice na may sa mga mag-aaral na inilalayo ang kanilang sarili para magkaroon ng panibagong pananaw sa pag-unawa ng isang context or information sa picture that was presented to them by their teacher. Gusto natin na maintindihan nila bakit ang ilang mga issue na bagamat hindi nararanasan, hindi nagiging apektado ay importanteng pag-usapan. Dapat solusyonan, inilalapit natin ang ating mga estudyante sa ideyang na hindi porket nararanasan ng isang particular issue ay wala na dapat pakialam. And this is Edward Berman. Edward Berman suggests that the specific types of lessons examine power relationships that are found in language and literature, and that these practices show students that language is never neutral, because critical literacy looks different in every classroom based on the subject matter and the population of students. There is no formula for how teachers engage students in mastery of critical literacy. However, there are some practices that appear in lessons more commonly. Berman maintains that developing of the pedagogy that includes critical literacy is an organic process that continually needs to be revisited and refined. Berman reviewed articles published between 1999 and 2003 in the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy that focused on lessons and units emphasizing critical literacy pedagogy in middle and high school grades. Berman's methodology included searching electronic databases for the keyword critical literacy. After refining his search to include articles that contained classroom applications only, Berman found 36 articles that presented lessons or units intended to support critical literacy at the upper primary or secondary levels. Includes grades 4 to grade 12. Next, we'll be talking about reading supplemental text. Reading supplementary text, representative of today's changing media and technology, allows students to make connections with the literature or content being studied. Supplementary texts also provide the context of students to confront social issues that are often avoided by canonical works and are not covered in dated textbooks. Students have the opportunity to critique themes and issues similar to those found in traditional texts, but they can also look at other mediums. Layunin ng critical literacy na mai-connect yung information na binabasa nila sa iba pang information na available through online, printed at kung saan pa, nang sa gayon ay makita nila if the information or the text does support sa hindi makataang pagtingin ng particular or supports or encourages marginalization of specific sectors of our society. We also want na sa pagbabasa ng mga bata ay maunawaan nila kung merong forces o humuhubog pa paano sinusulat ang information o paano ipinapakita. Students that has critical literacy will be able to analyze social themes and issues. Morrell said that by offering students the opportunity to review appropriate internet resources, songs, television, programming, and advertisements, as well as many other visual mediums, students have exposure to popular texts they can analyze outside the school as well. And some examples of supplemental text. We have detailed descriptions of methodology or materials and methods, tables of data to support the research findings reported in the paper. Next, we have raw data, datasets, and databases used, created, or contributed to in the research for an article. Next, figures such as charts, graphs, and images. Also, we have video clips, movie files, or animations that show research procedures, conditions, responses, and projections. And last, we have questionnaires, surveys, forms, quizzes, and other information gathering instruments used in research for the paper. And for the next one, reading multiple texts will be discussed by our next reporter, Caris Gil Tambag. Thank you for listening.